So, Paul, 10 years of Investigates. Congratulations.
Yeah, I guess. Thanks. Our 10th anniversary isn't until a couple of months away, but it's our 10th season.
So there's still time to get your present?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see what we can do about that.
Yeah, what is it? I know it's the golden anniversary at 25. I don't know what 10 is. It's probably wood or something like that.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
But, you know, I want to say, like, 10 years, we can talk about 10 years, and you've been at APTN, I think, just a little bit longer, but we've known each other longer than that.
Yep.
Do you remember how we met?
I seem to recall taking a red-eye to Ottawa and stumbling into the bureau to visit my good friend Kenny Williams.
That's right.
Kenneth Williams, I guess.
Kenneth T. Williams, I think he goes, now that he's a playwright, yes.
And somebody wanted to interview me about something she was working on in the Ottawa Bureau because I'd done a story related to it. I forget what one because it was easily 15 years ago, probably longer. But anyways, I remember, I'll never forget that interview because I kept saying every 10 minutes, I'm jet lagged, I don't know where I am or what I'm saying, but I'll answer your questions.
Oh, that's right. You know what? That was not my first memory, but you're right. I think that is the first time we met. And we set up a camera, we shot it in your face, and I grilled you after you got off a plane. I'm so sorry. No, my first memory was maybe it's like a second memory, but it was the day after. Because what I remember is everybody had said, well, Paul Barnsley, you know Paul Barnsley. And of course, I was starting out as a journalist. I didn't know anybody. APTN was my first real full-time job. I'd been there for a couple of months. And they were like, Paul Barnsley's coming to town. Paul Barnsley coming to town. And it was like this famous person was coming. Yeah. And you were Indian famous because we walked into, there's a AFN AGA going on, right? And we walked in, and all these chiefs, I thought like I was starting to know my way around politics, but walking in with you, it was like walking with this rock star. Chiefs were walking up, they're handing you envelopes, they wanted to talk to you. They had leads and scoops and secret deals that they wanted to share with you. I mean, you'd been in the business a long time by then.
Yeah, actually it's really weird. In a couple of months, it will be 25 years to the day since I walked into the old Indian hospital on the Six Nations territory that had been bought by Band Council and was basically the home of the local weekly newspaper. And I had to ask directions to find the reserve. It's only the most populous one in the country. And I'd lived within 20 minutes of it for most of my life. And I had no idea what I was getting into, but I applied for a job, and for some reason, Shirley Smith hired me, and we had a great time, 4 or 5 years there, 10, 11 years at Windspeaker, and a little over 11 years here now. So 25 years working for Aboriginal-owned media.
Well, you know, and I think my point is that, like, you built up a hell of a lot of trust with people. I mean, you were the most trusted journalist in our communities. But how is it that you end up, I mean, we know you're not Native. How is it that you end up working for a Native news organization? You make a career out of it, you develop all this trust. What's your perspective on that?
I never thought about that before. I guess I better start. This chair is going to
You have to stay still, sir. Well, there we go.
See, I got out answering that question.
Old print reporters and broadcast.
All right. So the term I've used a lot over the years because it's how I saw it is I went through the looking glass. I had no idea. I grew up in the suburbs in Hamilton, Ontario. When I got to the res and started going out on assignments, every time I went out, I'm going, no, this can't happen in Canada. There's no way. And then when I found out, oh yeah, and not only is it going on, but it's been going on for a long time. I mean, if you're a journalist, that's the kind of thing you should be looking for. You know, if things aren't working as advertised. I guess I'm a little jaded at this point, but when I hear people talk about, you know, Canada the good, Canada, you know, we got some shady stuff in our past, and as long as we choose not to confront it, it's going to keep going. And I never got bored, because there is no way you get bored as a journalist working on the Indian affairs beat. But I saw a chance to do a lot of good. And I don't know, when I started, I just was like a little excited puppy. I just ran from story to story to story, and something happened. I talked to a chief once in Prince George, and of course I'm not going to remember her name now, but she basically said, yeah, our people are, we're busy building something, you know, we've been held back, we've been marginalized for a long time, but we need somebody to do the stories, do the journalism, shine a light in places maybe people don't want it shone, and then you go ahead and do that. You're doing a decent job. So we're busy, we got other stuff to do. Now, of course, since I've come to APTN, I'm going, well, you know, there's an awful lot of Indigenous people that want to get in on the game. I really felt for the first 10, 12 years I was doing this, I had it all to myself. The mainstream didn't do much.
You did have it all to yourself,
yeah.
That's right.
And I just felt a sort of a responsibility to not screw it up.
I guess, you know, the way I'm thinking about it is, like, I'm remembering a time where they didn't want Indigenous journalists covering Indigenous stories because they felt like, oh, you'll be biased. And there's kind of this change now where if you're Indigenous, it's really hard to have a career where you're covering anything but Indigenous stories.
Well, think of the flip side of that. So we shouldn't have non-Indigenous people covering. You know, it's just silly. A lot of stuff that gets accepted as common sense is nonsense, if it's not downright racist. And the great gift I've received is being able to go through the looking glass and see it from different perspectives and come to an understanding of that. I may never have got to that point if I hadn't stumbled into that old Indian hospital on Six Nations Reserve and just started pounding away. I worked for a magnificent woman who retired at age 65, moved back home to the res, and bought the local paper. And she was a muckraker extraordinaire, just amazing. Mohawk clan mother, tiny woman, 5'11", 4'11", maybe 100 pounds, but tough as nails and smart as a whip. And she just kept sharpening me up and throwing me out there. Go talk to this person, go talk to that person, ask them this. And then I'd read the Indian Act, and I just, no, this can't be, you know. But every story I did was sort of like a snowflake, you know. And after you've done enough of them, you got a good-sized snowbank. And people still come to me. They don't want to have to look things up in the Indian Act. They go, well, Paul, what does this mean? Or what's that section? And I suddenly, you know, after a number of years go by, I suddenly go, wow, I didn't even know I knew that. But I've had a chance in this job to suddenly go, yeah, I guess I've accumulated a certain amount of knowledge.
Well, let's talk about this job. Let's move on to the investigate. So you're the executive producer. I know you're often behind the scenes. We're going to talk a little bit about a story that you did, but in your daily role, why don't you tell people what this mysterious executive producer of the show does?
Good. I get a lot of help. I've had in the history of the show 3 really good producers, Fran Compton, Todd Lamarand, and now Holly Moore. They look after a lot of the nuts and bolts. There's days when I sit in my office, and I have an office now. For the first 8 years, I was stuck in a corner. I can show you the dent in my head from the doorknob, you know, and people would come in.
Just so people know, Paul was threatening to put tape
Yeah.
around his desk,
Somebody
like
did
Les
that to me.
Nessman.
I was going to get a Silver Sow Award. Is that what they called it on WKRP?
He's a Silver Sow.
And, you know, strategizing. I always have worked hard. I'm passionate about the job. I have a lot of contacts, obviously, accumulate them over the years as well. So the phone rings pretty regular, and email, of course, is a curse I didn't have in the early years. I look back fondly on those days, because I'll get 1,000 or so of them a day. And I'm just looking for story ideas, and sometimes I'm helping people with the story ideas they came up with and saying, well, you may need to look here, or you may want to get this report, or you might want to talk to this person. And then I guess the biggest part of my job when the season's on is sitting down and deciding if it looks good. And for a print guy in the beginning,
I was going to ask about that because you didn't have a lot of respect for television as a print journalist. used to like just shame me about broadcast. So what's it look like now? Now through another looking glass.
It's harder than it looks. And I got pretty good at doing what I did before I came here. So it was tough to start from scratch, really start from scratch. I'm sure there's a lot of folks in this building who went, why the heck did I hire this guy for a TV news show? He doesn't know anything about TV. And so I had to learn it the hard way. I'm not even close to knowing it all, or even most of it, I don't think yet, which is the cool part. I can keep learning. But TV has a power, if you do it right, that print can never have. There's the emotional element I found. You can make people feel. You can make them change. You get them outraged, they'll stop and they'll go, this is wrong. We have to do something about this. In print, it's pretty cold-blooded, pretty analytical, very factual. Anybody who's familiar with my work at Windspeaker knows I couldn't write a story under 1,500 words to save my life.
You had long stories. Yeah.
Because I like to dig deep. And, and to have to, like I'm doing these scripts now for our retrospective series that we're going to be doing on Sunday afternoons all season.
Well, by the time this plays, they will be running.
I guess I'm sure they will. And, this is another thing you're supposed to know about TV is, but, you only get so many seconds to get your message out. And you only get so many words, and every one of those words has to count. And so there's a real discipline involved, a real artistry involved that I, quite frankly, didn't appreciate before I got into this business. And I fully admit that.
But what you did bring in to investigate, though, was really the journalism, the hard-hitting journalism, the digging, the sources. You've done your unit has done some controversial pieces. There was a point before you came here that you even took on APTN.
Yeah. First couple of months I was here, it was a little tense in the elevator at times. Some of the old guard, they have a certain loyalty to their company and to the people they worked with, and I created a certain amount of kerfuffle here.
Yeah, APTN went through some growing pains.
Yes, they did. They did.
So now you're moving on into investigates. I guess I'm wondering, you're doing some pretty confrontational journalism. That's really new.
Yeah, it is.
For our people.
Yeah, and what I used to do it early on, and then I'd get calls from elders saying, this is not our way. Because I'd be really hard-nosed. Even unpleasant, I guess might be the word. Because I was asking about things that were just outrageous. And people were trying to smooth them over or turn the page or misdirect your attention away. They didn't want to change. And I'd get in somebody's face at a public event, and some elder would witness that and either take me aside or I'd get a call the next day. And thank you, elders everywhere. They have kept me in line. They have taught me so much.
But I do know what you mean.
But we're edging our way back there because as so many people who look at the history of APTN realize that we're doing the same stories over and over again. Nothing is changing the way it should. We were promised change on the last campaign trail and during the early days of this government. And there's another election coming up soon, and I haven't seen that much real change.
I really get the feeling that there has been a change. I had the same thing when I started. People would say, oh, you were rude, you cut off the minister. And I was torn between kind of my cultural politeness, if you will, and my education as a journalist. But my feeling now is that our people want us to push. I don't know if that's your sense of it, but people may not know this, but we do groups where we bring in audiences and we watch them watch one of our show, and we stand behind a glass and they comment on the show. And some of the investigates where people were really pushing were what the people really wanted to see. I think you're right, there's an impatience.
I remember once doing an interview with, I believe it was Herb Dollywall, who was the fisheries minister at the time, and Robert Nault, who was the Indian Affairs minister at the time. And we did it on the phone. And it was at AMSA, which is the company that owns Windspeaker. And they decided to run the call through the radio studio so they could record it and make radio out of it, as well as what we were going to do with the paper. And we had a couple of interns there who were watching. And this was during the Lobster Wars. And Dollywall said something to the effect that, you know, he's just following regulations. And I just jumped all over him. I said, oh, come on, Minister. This is about the government having the upper hand, the government keeping the top step in the ladder of confederation. And if you tell me it's anything else, how can I believe anything you say? And these two young women, they weren't 18-year-old or 16-year-old students. They were mature students. They were in their 20s, maybe even 30s. We're standing outside the glass, jumping up and down, high-fiving each other and going, yes. And that's why I'm going, okay, so the elders are telling me to be respectful and polite and non-confrontational, but those guys out there really seem to enjoy this. So yeah, it's always, you know, I've lasted this long because I want to be respectful, even when I've got to ask hard questions. But sometimes what one person considers respectful, the other person doesn't. So can't please everybody.
It's a balance.
Yeah.
I guess we should talk a little bit about Too Good to Be True. That's the episode that you did. It's actually the only episode in 10 years that you actually went out into the field and filed.
Yeah. Because
mostly you're setting them up, as you said, you're doing the research, supporting the other journalists, but you went out and you did this one. Tell me a bit about the story.
You know, I was trying to remember where it came from. And we'd just done a number of stories with people on the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta related to David Blatt, a lawyer who eventually was disbarred for the way he treated Indian residential school survivors. And I'd met a lot of people. And this American company, ZW Global, I wanted to call it ZW, but that would have made it a Canadian company.
Of you, yeah.
We're going around signing people up. You sign right here, we'll give you a free laptop.
Yeah, you get the free laptop,
yeah.
But then 95% of your insurance goes back to the company, and they're saying they're going to build houses with it. So as people die, the idea was that they would get more and more money in a trust, and then they would go and buy houses on reserve.
Yeah. And this guy...
Or build houses on reserve, I should say.
This guy, he made a lot of enemies along the way. And when the word got out that I was looking into his activities, I got a lot of really interesting phone calls from people all over the United States. And I realized that he burned people in several locations south of the border, and now he was coming up into my backyard. I considered Canada my backyard, by the way.
But he actually, I mean, what he's doing is kind of like this Ponzi scheme, but nobody at the Blood Reserve was actually out of money.
No. It was the insurance companies who were, you know, a lot of money at the end. And am I wrecking the ending by doing this? No, this is separate from my story, isn't it?
Yeah. But I guess is the takeaway just like how vulnerable our communities could be for people to take advantage of them?
Yes. Bottom line, I talked to a social worker who works on the Blood Reserve who's done some really amazing work. She was the one who brought the Blatt lead to us originally. She was probably one of the people who brought this ZW Global story to us. And she said, yes, she works with a lot of people who are living in desperate circumstances. And that makes you vulnerable. That makes you just, you're easy pickings for flim flam, man. And this guy, I mean, there's so many stories I still can't tell because it would burn sources and they'd be much more interesting in a podcast. But the paper trail was there. I started finding things. He'd started to declare bankruptcy in Nevada and then decided that wouldn't be good for business. This guy who claimed to be a multimillionaire, who was a humanitarian, a philanthropist, was behind 5 payments on his 10-year-old minivan. He was living in a rented house.
He didn't even own his own house, right?
Yeah.
He was renting.
No furniture in it. The guy was just a fake. And when I found him, he'd started the paperwork for his bankruptcy, and he had to declare all this stuff, so it was there, public record. Anybody could have got it. And then there was also a lead that he was trying to convince the Blood Tribe Band Council to give him an advance of $60,000. And in the bankruptcy records, it showed that was the exact amount he was in debt. So it was pretty easy to put 2 and 2 together. Now, there's a couple of counselors at the time who'd had, for lack of a better word, fallen for this guy's. Like, it was an impressive story. He put a lot of work into creating this aura.
It sounds like it's crazy, but it sounds like it's crazy, but it could be true.
He even had Douglas Cardinal, a noted Canadian Indigenous architect, at one point was going to participate in this project. Now, Mr. Cardinal's probably going to be mad at me, because when I discovered that, I called him and I wanted to talk to him, and he went, He had nothing to do with it. So I'm sure, being a brilliant man that he is, he figured out what was going on pretty quick and distanced himself from it. But this is the kind of, this guy brought in a person of that quality into his scam. One of the people I met was a lawyer for the insurance company that he really targeted. I'm still being careful legally. I'm not going to use certain words because it's not concluded, believe it or not. But they sued him for, I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million. So they paid off policies on people that had died. And they were really aggressive when a person did die on the Blood Tribe Reserve, going after them. They needed the death certificate to collect that insurance that they'd signed.
So they were collecting.
Yeah. So it wasn't a story that was made for TV. There was a lot of documents. I never did get this fellow to sit down for an interview. Nobody's heard from him since. So he's obviously he'd always said he wanted to go and live in Europe. So maybe he got to Geneva or someplace like that and living on whatever ill-gotten gain he may have gotten. I know the insurance companies would like have a word with him. But it was, to me it was just a classic investigative story.
And Paul, I've got to ask you, because I know you're wrapping up, you're going to retire in a few years. I mean, you've already won a Lifetime Achievement Award for Human Rights Reporting, so congratulations for that.
Thanks. I was wondering if they're trying to tell me something.
What is it? Is there something that you want to be remembered for? Is there a contribution that you've made?
Well, number one, a white guy can make a contribution if he's smart about it, humble enough, willing to accept that he doesn't know everything. Haven't done any whitesplaining for a long time.
I think it is important for people to hear that, because I know there's a lot of non-Native journalists that come up and ask, and I always think, God, you should talk to Paul. Paul could tell you how to break into this community. Yeah.
Yep. There's a few stories in my own mind I tend to take credit for that I'm not sure that's true. It makes me feel better. I do know for a fact that most of the people who started lawsuits related to residential schools that eventually became the settlement agreement at some point in time said this story would have died a long time ago if you hadn't kept it along just by sheer stubbornness.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of that.
Good. You know what? I'm trying to think, how long have you actually been at APTN now?
It's 11 years, 11 years and about 3 weeks.
11 years. Aren't you supposed to get something when you're here for 10 years?
Okay, you're really.
Paul.
I thought it was an 11-year thing.
I've been holding on to this. We've had it for a while.
Thank you.
Congratulations on 10 years of Investigates and 10 going on 11 years of APTN. Whoop.
Oh, careful, you're going to
I'm
rip your
caught.
mic off. This is a dirty pool. You know that. Thank you.
And that's Holly, of course, the
yes.
producer you were just bragging about. Well, Paul, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. I have to see if I can get our facilities department to allow me to put a nail in the wall now. Can I cover up your notes here?